Hello, greetings everyone. My name is Jeremy Hurd and I'm one of the assistant principals at North Middle School. And this presentation that I'm going to be giving to you today is on restoring respect, managing defiant and disruptive behaviors effectively. Obviously, in the classroom today, it's very difficult to manage a lot of the student behaviors that we see. And one of the reasons for that is because we just have students that are coming to us with a lot of different parenting styles, and they're also coming to us with different learned behaviors into the classroom. And what we have to do is we have to be able to respond to all different kinds of students and their behaviors. But what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about not just how to manage behaviors, but what are some of the root causes of those behaviors. And I really love this quote here by Dr. Debbie Silver. She says, "When I'm asked how do I get students to like and respect me, my immediate response is to like and respect them first." And I think that first and foremost, we can always start there by making sure that we are making sure that we're controlling ourselves and controlling the way that we respond to behavior. And of course, that's liking and respecting our students. And so I really like that quote and just wanted to share that before we get started here today. Just a little bit about myself and my background. I've been in education for 23 years now. I got my bachelor's and master's at SDSU, and then I went on to attend USD for my specialist degree. I've served at various capacities. I've been an administrator for 15 years. I currently serve, like I said, as one of the North Middle School assistant principals, and I've also served as a head principal, a special education director, and a small school superintendent. Life's travels and my career travels have brought me back to the Black Hills, where my wife and I are both from. And so we're excited to be back in the Rapid City Area School District. And as you can see, I taught at Dakota Middle School in the Rapid City Area School District for 8 years prior to jumping into school administration. So, and down there in the middle is my daughter, Brianna, and she's going into the 8th grade, and my wife, Lisa, who's also a teacher in education here at North Middle School. And she teaches 7th grade ELA. So we're going to talk a little bit about the targets that we're going to try to look at as we go through this presentation. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the family dynamic structures, and just have a quick conversation about that and understand also a little bit about family dysfunction and how that's impacting behavior as well. We're going to talk a little bit about childhood trauma, behavior as a result to that, and how we can create safe and trauma-responsive classrooms in regard to that. And we're also going to look a little bit at some of the behavior research and understanding what are the most impactful practices that we can engage in when it comes to student behavior, and also what are those home factors that also have a huge impact. And then we're going to discuss classroom procedures and expectations, looking at that from the classroom level, but also from the school and building level. We're going to talk about classroom management processes that you can utilize in your classroom, as well as a leveled approach to dealing with that, so that you can reduce the number of students that you're sending out of your classroom. We're going to talk about positive redirection, encouragement, also conference strategies that you can use with your students as well. And then we're going to dive deeper into actual strategies that you can use, things that you can say or prompts that will allow you to manage your classroom more effectively. So we're going to kind of hit on all these points. I know there's a lot here, but it'll be great information for you to have. So I want to start with this picture because, when you first look at this picture, you might reference that to maybe a child that has autism, for example, and the complexities inside of the human brain when it comes to, let's say, on students who are autistic or on the autism spectrum. But I also look at this picture and I think about students with all of their different backgrounds, things that they've learned in their lifetime, their experiences, and just how their whole life journey has brought them into the classroom, and what are the complexities that lie underneath. We don't always know whether a student has been traumatized in some way, or their parents have been through divorce, or their parents are dealing with drugs and alcohol, or maybe even just having to move all the time. But there's a lot of complexities that go into behavior. But many times what we see on the surface is not necessarily what's going on inside the brain or inside of a student's mind. So we have to be very mindful of the fact that, students are coming to us and they have a lot of complexities, and especially some of the emotional things that they have had to deal with in their lifetime can have a tremendous impact on their behavior in the classroom. So I always say it's great for us to be empathetic and be curious about what those things are that are impacting a student and their behavior, because most of the time it has nothing to do with the classroom teacher or yourself, and it has a lot more to do with things that they're bringing inside the class from outside of school. That are having an impact on their behavior. You just so happen to, that particular moment in your classroom maybe was a trigger for them, or they just were overwhelmed at that moment and just had enough. So just be mindful of that and think about the complexities that are going on underneath every student and the experiences that they bring into the classroom. So let's go ahead and start by talking about family dynamics real quick. And I want to talk about family structures and especially how things have changed over time with family dynamics. So most of you may not know this family, but I actually grew up watching reruns of this show with my grandparents when I always went over to their house. But this show was Leave It to Beaver. And the beaver is down there, down at the bottom there, the smaller kid. And of course, he had his brother, mom, and dad. But this was the typical family in the 1950s. The dad was kind of the guiding conscience for Beaver and getting him to understand how he was supposed to behave and act in the world. And his mom was more or less the nurturing, kind, caring, compassionate one that really taught him empathy. But this was, in many ways, shapes and form, a traditional 1950s family. And a lot of the things that we learned from shows like this, they had moral values and different things that were taught that really kind of guided how families should act, or the roles that different family members should have. And then we, of course, have the Brady Bunch. And that was kind of a unique blending of families, because we had two families that were kind of coming together as one, and the dynamic shift that was going on there. But that was, late 60s and into the 70s when that show was running. Similar things would Leave It to Beaver, but great moral values and different things were taught to students just watching the show, or taught to families watching the show. And then you may recognize this family as well. This was Growing Pains, and I loved this family as well. They had their own quirks and dynamics as well, but also a great family in the 1980s. And then we have Full House, and this was one that I grew up watching and I related to very well, because I was also raised by a single father myself. But certainly there were different family entities helping out here, friends, family, all trying to raise these kids together. And so it was kind of a unique show, but always a good, wholesome show to watch as far as family values were concerned. And then as we progress to modern day families, certainly the dynamics are very different and things have changed. We have everything from traditional families, kind of like the one here on the left, but the gentleman in the middle obviously is the father of two of the people in the picture, one on the left, one on the right. But he also has started a new family, and not only do they have their own child together, but they have a child from a previous marriage, and then there is a non-traditional couple as well that has a child as well. So there's different family dynamics, obviously, today that have ever existed before, and really the door is wide open to the environments that students are coming from, not in the traditional sense that we may be used to in the past. But we also know that social media has had a huge influence on our kids as well. And if you look at the picture of the gentleman in the upper left-hand corner, he's kind of having a good positive experience with his child. He's both on social media and so is the kid, but they're kind of interacting together. Whereas the mom down at the bottom in the center is kind of trying to see what her daughter is engaging with, but that may not be as positive as an interaction. And then, of course, whether the kids are engaging socially in something serious or like a serious text that's coming through, or if they're just watching a funny video or whatever, it can also be a great social activity. But we also know that it also has had negative impacts on our students as well. There's no doubt that some of the things that our students can consume can be either quite negative, violent, potentially sexual, whether there's drug use or those kind of things. So really, our students are not very sheltered from the outside adult world like they used to be. It's right there at their fingertips if they want to access it. And of course, many of our parents aren't necessarily monitoring that content they're accessing 24/7. So the world is much bigger for our students now, and they have access to way more things than they used to, which ultimately does contribute to some of the behavior that we see as well, because they're just mimicking and repeating some of the behavior that they see, whether it's positive or negative. But we also have some serious family dynamics that happen in some of our households. And, you know, most of us, I would say most of us in education who grew up probably have had very good households, very good parent households. We grew up in places that were positive, but we also have students that are growing up in places that aren't. And whether you look at the picture in the upper left-hand corner where there's some alcohol abuse going on there, or some drug use, like the picture in the lower left-hand corner, I mean, it could be happening right in front of the kids, and the parents not sheltering that, or kids actually doing drugs with their parents, more in the middle school, high school age. You could even have parents in like the lower right-hand corner who are always constantly fighting and in conflict all the time, or the child feels like they're in the middle. Or you could have children living in filthier conditions, like in the upper right-hand corner, and whether or not those things are positive for their mental health. And just understanding that these sorts of environments certainly play a huge factor in our students' lives. And whether you're looking at the student in the middle who, you know, obviously looks depressed and down, and how that might be impacting the student. But when we also know that because social media is so rampant, that students are really attached to their phones. And for students in a who come from trauma, they're probably more likely to use their phones than any other student. Like for example, my daughter is rarely on her phone. She's more of a computer person, but her phone is not necessarily attached to her as a means of coping with anything. But for students that come from trauma environments, their phone can literally be a sort of a lifeline for them. It can be their connection to their peers, or it can just be a way to zone out from all the stressors of life. But we also need to be very mindful of the fact that we have students who are also being raised by parents who have mental illness issues or mental health issues themselves. And sometimes the messages that they might be receiving from a parent who doesn't have great parenting skills, or who maybe was parented more harshly themselves, is, you know, somewhat repeating that cycle. And so this has a dramatic impact on the message that our students receive about who they are and their self-confidence. And so we need to be mindful of that, because we do not want to be in a situation where we are further damaging a student who has been through a lot of different verbal abuse as well, or been in a household where their parent is not a supportive piece for them in their mental health. It's not helping them through some of their issues, or is just exacerbating or making things worse by some of the messages that they are sending to their child about who they are. And a lot of that just comes from trauma and stress that the parent has had in their past. But it's more prominent today than it ever has been. So it's just something we need to be very mindful of, is that our students and their experiences at home could be positive ones, but they can also be negative ones as well. So let's talk a little bit about childhood trauma and behavior and how that impacts students. And I think before I even give you any kind of strategies to use in the classroom, I think that this is the most important thing that you can learn in dealing with students who tend, like the majority of students who have behavioral concerns are more than likely impacted by some sort of trauma in their life. And it's good for us to look at that lens first before we look at the behaviors and try to be understanding and empathetic and kind about how we're dealing with students who misbehave. Not to say that students shouldn't have consequences, even if they've been from trauma environments. I'm certainly not saying that, but I am saying that it is good for us to have a lens into that and make sure that we're being mindful of student backgrounds. So statistics are suggesting that about 50 to 70% of our children in our classrooms have experienced some sort of traumatic event. It really is a simple truth. So if you think about that, over half the students, if you just count, over half the students in your classroom have been through some sort of trauma. And so we don't necessarily know what that is, but what we can say is that it may have an impact on their general behavior in the classroom. And just understanding that is very important. And we know that a child who's experienced abuse and neglect and a disruptive home environment has experienced enough trauma to already have behavioral health needs. So if there's anything in the home environment that has disrupted a child's ability to self-regulate and be a part of what I would consider a normal environment, they already have behavioral health needs. We already know that. And the behavior can manifest. It could be disruptive, depressive, anxious, or aggressive behavior. And we'll talk more about that. But I really like this image over here on the right-hand side where it says, there's no problem children, only children who need help with their problems. And so what we understand with students who misbehave is that a lot of them have not been taught proper ways to cope with stressors in their life. And so when they're in your classroom and they are being asked to do an assignment, it may just be that they are at a state of overwhelm or exhaustion or whatever, and they just finally blow their cap. And so, but we understand that, that the children are not necessarily the problem. We just need to help them learn how to deal more, to deal better with their stressors when they do come, and help with their behavior in the classroom. And we sometimes have to teach students what those proper behaviors are. So moving on to this next slide, I want to highlight this just so that you can see this as a broad picture. But the reality is that for many of us who are in K-12 education, a lot of a student's ability to self-regulate, their social emotional development and cognitive development occurs in the first 1,000 days of their life. And so it's just important to understand that many times what we are doing is we are trying to unravel or really try to understand why a student is behaving the way that they are. But we also sometimes have to get to a point where we dissect certain behaviors and try to get them to reframe how they handle situations. Okay, so for example, students who have some sort of who've experienced secure attachment early are more likely to form healthy peer and adult relationships. We know that. That's a positive thing. And early development helps students manage frustration, follow directions, recover from setbacks, and it has a huge impact on their attention span, their working memory, and executive function. So imagine a student that comes from a trauma-related environment. They're already being set back if those things don't exist in their first 3 years of life. Okay, so it's just important that we understand that that early childhood development is so crucial in how those students enter our kindergarten classrooms and beyond, because some of those behaviors can be embedded so early that we have to kind of deprogram them from some of the behaviors that they've been doing for 5 years before they enter classroom or longer. But also, it's important to note those surrounding factors as well, that students need safety. They need a responsive caregiver. They need to have good health and nutrition and early learning for them to fully develop into the child that we hope that they will be. But of course, if any of those things are lacking, we certainly will have a very difficult time trying to get that student to get to a place where they are self-regulating and can learn in the classroom and can have some social emotional control as well. So if you're not familiar with ACEs, this is very important to adverse childhood experiences, but these have a significant impact on students and their cognitive and behavioral development. And so whether we're talking about abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, or sexual, we're talking about neglect or household dysfunction, each one of these factors multiplies and adds up and creates bigger issues for behavior down the road. Okay, like for example, if a student doesn't experience any abuse or neglect, but yet they've had parents that have been divorced or that also are in substance abuse, and substance abuse sometimes ends up in incarceration, or maybe they have mental illness in addition, or they've seen some sort of violence against a parent. So just these alone would be 5 factors in just household dysfunction alone. Now, abuse and neglect, those are obviously significant factors, but household dysfunction is also a huge component of a child's social emotional development. And so we just have to make sure that we are aware of all of those things. And the more of these that we add up, the bigger the problem is. So we have everything from what we would consider positive stress to tolerable stress to toxic stress. And so positive and tolerable stress are things that we can deal with, okay? And a lot of the times, like positive stress, it might just be like a cat jumped out from behind the barn or something, or we just got surprised by something real quick. So that's kind of positive stress. We easily go back to being regulated. But then there's tolerable stress. Maybe it's something a little bit more serious, but most of the time there's some sort of parent or caring adult that has buffered this behavior. And so we're able to get back to recovery. But then talking about the students who have experienced ACEs, for example, sometimes the adults are the issue, right? And they don't have any adult buffers in their world to try to bring them back to being regulated. So this is really toxic to a student and their brain development and their ability to really be present in the classroom. It has lifelong consequences for their own health, but then they never get a break from that toxic stress. And many times, students who are in those toxic stress environments, school is the place where they get that break, where they can get away from that toxic stress environment and maybe get themselves to a more tolerable stress environment. But getting them to positive stress may be very difficult. So we just have to understand that that big picture, that toxic stress really has a significant impact on our students and their ability to learn and to behave in the classroom. So when we look at the number of ACEs that a student has, we really are looking at those who might have 4 or more, because those students, based on the research, are 32 more times more likely to be labeled with a learning or behavior problem. So we really need to make sure that we're very protective of these students. We understand that adverse childhood experiences, just like in this picture, has so many impacts, whether it's their relationship with adults and peers, their ability to respond and learn or figure things out, increases problems with their learning. Their stress hormones are activated at a higher level, which puts them into fight or flight more easily. They can have higher heart rate, blood pressure, all of those things. And those health problems can also exacerbate themselves into them missing school and different things like that. And they just have a low tolerance for stress. So sometimes fighting or defiance are quite common with students who are coming from adverse childhood experience environments. So here's the research from Harvard that shows the progression of the number of risk factors or number of ACEs. As you can see, once it jumps to 4, 1 to 3 is usually not a significant factor, but once you get to 4 or more, the number of children with developmental delays increases significantly. And you can also see that jump from even 4 to 5 is pretty huge. But the fact that if you have 7 out of 9 ACEs, you're 100% more than likely going to have some sort of developmental delay. So we, we understand from the research that adverse childhood experiences have a significant impact on their development for dealing with behavior. So we talked about this a little bit already, but I just want to highlight a couple of the pictures in here. So a lot of what you see here in a couple of aspects, there's 3: having to deal with intense mood swings, a parent suffering for personality disorder, being abused. So you'll notice that these are pictures of parents using harsher discipline, verbal discipline, where they are maybe saying negative things or putting the child down or those kind of things. That can have a big impact on a student, and that can be very traumatic. But also everything from parent neglect or the student themselves being more the parent role than the parent is and taking care of them, just not being properly cared for or having their emotional needs met, like when they're crying or hurt, not having that parent be responsive. And then, losing a parent, obviously is a huge impact on our kids. So we need to be conscious of what trauma looks like, because we may not think of these little things as being traumatic to students, but they can be. And so we look at the brain research, we look at the brain scans, and you can see that this brain over here is the brain of an orphan who was institutionalized shortly after birth. And you can see how the activity in that brain is practically dark. There's no activity going on in those areas. And those areas are the temporal lobes that regulate emotions and receive input from senses. Now, the other thing that you're going to notice is that the learning part of the brain is the front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. And we need that part of our brain to be active in the classroom and learn information. And so you can see that even though that activity is there on the orphan child on the right, their brain, it's significantly reduced. The activity is reduced. So when we're talking about students from trauma-related environments too, we need to understand too that they are going to have a more difficult time not only learning appropriate behavior, but they're going to have a hard time learning content in the classroom as well. And so we're going to have to develop strategies to make sure that we're repetitive in certain things so that we're able to get that information across to them. And so we have to understand that they're going to pick up information much slower. So really, when we talk about behavior is really the tip of the iceberg. When we look at that on the surface, that's what we're looking at every day in the classroom. We see that disruptive student, we see that defiant student displaying a behavior, and we're reacting and responding to it. But rarely in that moment do we ever think that it's all these other things going on underneath that's really contributing to that. The stress, their own self-esteem, anxiety, depression, fear, confidence. And then I put trauma at the bottom because trauma is the thing that's down deep. Trauma is something that lives in the body. It doesn't go away. We all know that we've experienced something adverse in our lifetime that has told us that it's not safe to do something. We may have gotten hurt. Someone we know may have gotten hurt. It may have impacted our lives, but trauma lives way deep down at the bottom there. And so, but it also has a way that trauma can have a way of rising to the surface very fast, if it's a trigger in the classroom too. And so we just need to be mindful of those things. So this quote talks about, the iceberg perspective, and you may just see anger sticking out and think that that's all that's going on. But when you look to understand and find out what those other factors are, you learn that what is under the iceberg, you can begin. And once you know what's under that iceberg, you can begin to foster change and restore relationships in your school culture. So we really want to dig deep. If we can find out a little bit more about our students, that's good. One of the things that I learned when we went to visit with Ruby Payne, she said that one of the best questions that you can ask a kid that maybe you're struggling with, it's a simple question. Just ask the question, how do you spend your time outside of school? How do you spend your time outside of school? And see what they tell you. You may find out that some of the things that they do or the experiences that they're having are maybe part of these things that are underneath the surface. So, but that's a good strategy to use when you're working with a kid that you are struggling with. So we understand Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Most teachers understand this, but we also just need to be, as a reminder, that basic needs have to be met first. If students are hungry or fatigued in your class, they're not going to be learning. They also need to have a feeling of safety and security in your room to understand that, if something is triggering them, we need to try to do everything we can to create safety in the classroom. And then we want to create belonging. We want to make sure that in our classrooms, everybody is respectful of one another, and that we have a classroom community where people are free to share their ideas and those kind of things without fear of repercussion. And then from there, we can build their self-esteem, and then we can get them to reach their full potential. So just something to always keep in mind there. So we've talked about all this trauma stuff, and I know we've gone kind of deep here into all of this, but in Ruby Payne's book, she talks about the sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous systems of our body. And all of this really comes from the autonomic nervous system, which encompasses all of those, the sympathetic and parasympathetic system. But what is very interesting is that this nervous system controls about 99% of what happens in our body. It's automatic. We don't even control it. And it's really based upon some of our previous experiences. But at the end of the day, that system creates a hierarchy of response based upon whether or not a student feels safe. So for our students who come from trauma, we really want to make sure that we are creating an environment that is safe for them. And if it's not safe, you're probably going to see one of these systems activated in some way, shape, or form. So students, for example, that come from trauma environments, they activate their SNS, or their sympathetic nervous system, when their environment is unsafe. So that you're going to see things like fear, anxiety, frustration, anger, rage, and you're going to see these kind of things happen. And so what we want to do is we want to try to figure out, okay, why is this happening? What is the root of them going into fight or flight here? Okay. Now, the great thing is that for students who don't come from trauma, they may activate their sympathetic nervous system, and they may go back to parasympathetic ventral vagal, where they're calm and grounded and everything's fine. Okay. But students who come from trauma environments, okay, they go to fight or flight very quickly. In fact, it can almost be like a light switch. Whereas students who don't come in from trauma environments, they may have a slow progression toward fight or flight, but you don't see that right away. But that's also why we have certain students who tend to get referred to the office more frequently, because little things end up activating that fight or flight response. And a lot of times, let's just say, for example, they're angry, they're frustrated, they're panicking, they maybe even have some anxiousness. Those things can sometimes end up being misbehaviors. But reality is that it's just a response to some sort of feeling of not being safe. So we need to be mindful of that. Some students can get stuck in the parasympathetic dorsal vagal. And so the more that a student has had to deal with fight or flight response, eventually they will move over to the parasympathetic dorsal vagal, and they become what we call trapped, or they shut down. So these are your kids who are in class who are disengaged. They feel trapped, hopeless, they're depressed and lonely because they have gone through so much trauma in the sympathetic nervous system that they are in shutdown. You might actually see a student who has gone through this feeling, let's say if they lost a parent, and they're in that sympathetic nervous system and anger, rage, frustration, and then all of a sudden they feel depressed about that loss. So, and what's important to understand is that we have to move students back through that. So if they're in parasympathetic dorsal vagal, we have to move them into sympathetic before we can move them into parasympathetic ventral vagal, where they're safe and socially engaged. So you're not going to see a student who's in that freeze or shutdown just jump back to safety. They have to go back through that progression again. So it's just important that we understand that many of these behaviors that we might see, these are automatic, and we may not be able to necessarily control them. But what we can do is provide the safest learning environment that we can for our kids each and every day, so that our students don't go to fight or flight or freeze and shut down on us. Ruby Payne talks about this too, but again, just to reinforce, safety and belonging is one of the most important factors that we can create in the classroom. From there, we can create choice and connection, and then that has a positive impact on our autonomic nervous system, like we talked about, which will allow us to engage the prefrontal cortex for learning. But unless we have safety, we provide some connection, and we have a positive response in our autonomic nervous system, we may have challenges with students. We may see disengagement in the classroom, students who feel disconnected. When learning, they may have a disconnected prefrontal cortex where that is very difficult for them to do. So just as a reminder, the greater level of danger that a student feels, the worse that situation will be. And I talk about this too, that when students are in fight or flight mode and you're in an argument with a student, it's going to activate their fight or flight response. And so sometimes you end up in toe-to-toe arguments or disagreements with a student, which eventually ends them getting sent out of the office. Getting sent to the office, excuse me. So we just need to be mindful of that to try to keep kids out of that fight or flight response. And how we do that is we make sure that we maintain calm and we maintain composure when the student is escalating their own behavior. Okay, so. And it's important to notice too that when a student gets triggered, that can actually disable their prefrontal cortex for up to 25 minutes before they can come back to a place where they can actually learn. So it's just important to know that once they're in fight or flight like that, it takes time. And they may need a break from the classroom to properly come back and engage in learning. So you might have to give students a little bit of time in that respect. So what advice would I have for teachers? First and foremost, we have to be co-regulators. Like I said, we got to be calm and consistent and make sure that we maintain a calm nervous system for our students. We got to watch out for signs of stress with students, understand that when a student is being disruptive or dysregulated, and ask them if they can step out in the hallway and have a conversation. Maybe they just need to take a little bit of a break. Okay, and that will help them. We got to create predictability. We have to have routines and clear expectations, and we got to make sure that those stay consistent. The expectations in the classroom can't change from one day to the next. We got to be consistent in there. We have to use connection before correction, always thinking about the relationship that we have with students before we move ourselves toward trying to correct behaviors. Now, obviously, sometimes students don't want to correct behaviors or don't want to fix that problem, and so we can't have them in the classroom if they are disrupting the class. So they may have to be removed, but we got to give kids opportunities to fix the problem if we can. And we want to avoid public confrontation. Okay, we do not want to go toe to toe. We don't want to get in an argument with a student in front of their peers. It's only going to escalate their behavior. It's only going to dysregulate the students even more, and they are not going to want to participate in class. So remember, when you're trying to address a behavior, you can always do it quietly in the classroom and try to get the student to re-regulate. But if they're agitated in any way, shape, or form, I would highly recommend getting them out into the hallway and seeing if you can have a private conversation with them there to see if it will help. Okay. If you're wanting to know more about trauma sensitive schools, a great person or great resource is Daryl Tonema. He's got a video on this subject on YouTube. You can watch it another time if you'd like, using the URL that I have there in the video. So we need to understand there's no magic bullet for dealing with childhood trauma and behavior at school. So we do the best that we can with our students. We want to do what we can to understand them. We want to understand trauma. We want to understand that these things can have a significant impact on behavior, and we want to try to get to the bottom of it. At the end of the day, we want to try to create the safest environment that we can, not only in our classrooms, but our schools, to make sure that our students can be successful. Okay. So let's talk about some classroom management strategies here. And I think that this is important, segueing from talking about trauma and understanding the behavioral components of that. Now it's, okay, what do we do when a student misbehaves? And how can we be trauma-informed and trauma-responsive to students and utilize effective skills and techniques? So let's talk about that for a second. First, let's get into the research here. So obviously, we know this was a study done in 23 and 24 by the National Center of Educational Statistics, but obviously teachers across the country are reporting that they're having to address student behavior issues multiple times a week. All right. And a lot of, since COVID-19, that has negatively impacted student behavior development as well. We understand that. Schools have seen increased classroom disruptions and misconduct. There's been a rise in threats with physical attacks on other students, sometimes even student to a teacher. Unfortunately, that's not good. But then there's a lot of anxiety and depression amongst our kids. So, and whether we want to shift the blame and say, well, this is all because of social media and those kind of things, like I said, we don't necessarily know what that home environment has been like either, or the home environment that they continue to go back to, that's been going on for years and years and years. And so it takes a tremendous level of patience and understanding for us to understand that our students are coming to us in a less ideal way. I want to talk about some research from John Hattie real quick. So if you're not familiar with his work, anything that's above a 0.4 toward that red area, we would consider that a positive component for student learning. Okay, that would have a significant, a positive impact on student achievement. So when you look at the research here, I mean, look at what it suggests with maltreated children, preterm low birth weight, or illness or mobility. Huge impacts, negative impacts on student learning. And we've talked about all this already, so this isn't anything we don't know, but the research backs that up. And students who have anger or anxiety or just even boredom in the classroom, who aren't maybe being as challenged as like they should, or suffering from depression, also are negatively impacted with their learning outcomes. But there is hope for us as well, because there's positive impacts like we talked about. Parental expectations and home environment, positive, significant impacts on student learning. We know that their development of their emotional intelligence and the school climate all have positive impacts as well. But you're going to notice that the one that has the biggest impact in the classroom is decreasing disruptive behavior in the classroom. Like, this has the greatest impact of anything that we can possibly do. So if we can do our job in making sure that disruptions don't occur in the classroom, it's going to have a positive impact on all of our students. So we also want to have strong classroom cohesion. That's how our students in the classroom get along. We want to have positive student relationships, and we want to have good classroom management, and we've got to have the skills to do that. So all of these are positive impacts that we want to focus on as we move forward here. So let's talk about classroom procedures and expectations. So in this particular example, this is kind of the way that my classes used to be when I was in school. I would come into the classroom and the teacher would tell me all the things that I couldn't do. I don't allow this, we don't allow that, and so on and so forth. And you can see that this teacher is really reinforcing that here, right? To go over a few of the rules. But sometimes we end up with too many rules, right? Too many rules. And the other problem that we have is that this teacher has done a great job, obviously, of saying what students can't do, but she hasn't told them anything about what they can do. And so a lot of times what happens is we tend to focus more on the negative side, but really we need to shift to teaching kids what we expect and to reinforce our expectations instead of always proclaiming to them what we don't want them to do. We need to tell them what we do want them to do. And so that can have a big impact on our students as well. So when you start at the very beginning of any school year, the first couple weeks of school, you need to make sure that you cover your classroom procedures in class. And so what does this mean? It means that you explicitly tell students exactly what you expect with each of these different issues, okay? So for example, how do you want students to enter the classroom every day? You should make sure that you communicate that with them. Or how do you handle tardies? What do we do during announcements or bell work? Okay, how does that work in your class? Maybe it's managing materials or turning in homework or missing homework. How do you want students to, when they have questions, what do they do? Do they raise their hand? Do they give a thumbs up or a thumbs sideways or thumb down? I mean, you have to make sure that you cover all of these different things. Okay, you're going somewhere. You should talk about what does that look like if you get a pass to go to the restroom? How much time do you have to get back? What happens when somebody new comes to class? How do we deal with that? What about at lunchtime or an emergency? Obviously, we need to know where we're going in emergencies, but you need to make sure that you cover these topics, okay? And there's a ton of these. I have some resources that I can email to you. I got my email that I'll provide you at the end of the presentation, and you're more than welcome to email me and I will share this with you. But it talks about Ruby Payne has this list and it shares all of the different instructional time issues that could come up, and the fact that you need to make sure that you write something in regard to how you're going to handle that. What is going to be your procedure in dealing with that? So don't overlook those things. Make sure that you look at your classroom procedures, and then make sure that you understand what you're going to do with each one of those scenarios, and that you teach and tell your kids what's going to happen. Because guess what? The best thing for us to do to create safety is to let students know what's going to happen next. Then it takes away all of that unknown from them, from that being a disruption in the classroom. So you may have your classroom procedures put together, but there's also a great thing that you can do as a building, or I would encourage your building to do, is to have a common set of expectations as a school as well. Because especially in the elementary setting, it's important to have common expectations there as well. But I also think it's important in the secondary as well, because many times we go from class to class to class, and the expectations might look different, or a teacher has a different philosophy about things. And so the more that we're sharing what we have in common, and the more that we're reinforcing what we want students to do or what we expect them to do, the better that we will be successful. So we created the acronym SOAR and focus on safety, ownership, acting responsible, and respect. Okay, so our school-wide expectations are here. So you can see on the left-hand side is our SOAR, and then across the top is the areas that we are focusing on in our school. And we, in PBIS, which is positive behavior intervention systems, you want to have 3 to 5 expectations in each one of those categories, but no more than 5. So you'll see that in some places, like for respect, following staff expectations, we carried that across the board in each area. But there's other parts, for example, like completing assignments. That's a classroom expectation for acting responsible. But all of our classes adhere to these expectations, and we want our students to adhere to them, and we expect our teachers to follow through with them as well. So what we did is we went through this as a building, and we all shared what we thought should be in this, and then we came up with common themes, and then voted on it, and then got this approved by our whole school. So everyone in our school agrees that these are our common expectations. So if you get an opportunity to do that, I think it's a great idea if you can do it. I'm going to talk about this real quick. Oh, yes, negative versus positive redirection. So you want to make sure that you're very careful about what you're saying, okay? Negative messages as you're coming into the classroom every day, that can be very defeating. If the first thing that a student hears is that you're late when you come in, okay? That can actually be kind of a negative thing with you building a positive relationship with that student, okay? To turn that around, to get a student to start coming to class on time, say, hey, I'm happy to see you. I need you to get started on this, okay? Now, you're still probably going to mark them tardy, but you didn't need to announce that to the rest of the class or to them. They already knew they were late. So it's really about changing the messaging that you're using in the classroom and ensuring that you're not overly negative when it comes to addressing certain things, okay? Go to the principal's office can even be a negative one. Let's talk about this later. Sometimes delaying the consequence can be a positive thing, okay? To say, we're going to address this behavior at another time. But if it's repeated or those kind of things, then it might lead itself to a referral. But you can always find different ways to rephrase certain things that you're saying so that they sound more positively and that are less triggering to students who come from trauma. Here are just a multitude of different things that that you can say in a positive way to students, like, hey, I know you can handle this. It's fun doing things with you. You have an awesome imagination. Anything that you can positively reinforce, especially a student who is constantly being told they're not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. That tends to kind of weigh on them and be a part of who they are the longer they hear those kind of messages. And some of that might have come from previous experiences in the classroom, but it could be coming from home on a consistent basis. So we got to find ways to build kids up in their self-esteem. And in addition to that, praising kids. Hey, you're a winner. Remarkable job. Beautiful work. Super job. Fantastic. Any kind of positive messaging that you can use with your students will have a profound impact on how they feel in your classroom, because they know that they're going to get positively reinforced and that they're going to be told that they're doing good things. And that is going to really lift their self-esteem, which will move a lot of your kids that are kind of in that dorsal vagal part back out to safety, where they actually feel like they can succeed in your classroom. All right, so I want to talk about this three-leveled component for discipline. Now, I share this story with people because I started using this about my third year of teaching. And what was happening is that I was sending kids out of the office all the time. I probably had about 70 referrals in a year, and sending kids out, primarily due to the fact that I just was not patient enough to deal with the students and their behavior at that time. But I really surveyed my kids and said, well, how can I do things differently here? So I really figured out this structure for dealing with student discipline, and it really works. And for kids from trauma-related environments, I would highly encourage you to use it as well. So let's talk about it for a second. So level one is a nonverbal or verbal redirection. So when a student is misbehaving or doing something that they shouldn't do, the most important thing you can do is address the behavior, either nonverbal or verbal, however you plan to do that, and remind them of the expectation. Okay, so you're going to remind them of what the classroom expectation is, and since you've already gone over that, they should know what that is and why they're being addressed. Okay, it's not a guess. You've already told them what your expectations are in the classroom or gone through your procedure, so you're just reminding them. Now, if they continue that misbehavior, now they go to level two, which is either a combination of nonverbal or verbal. You might actually get a little bit closer to them. And when you do get close to them, you may want to come from the side instead of face to face, because it's less confrontational, and say, hey, I reminded you about my expectation. You need to make sure that you follow through with that. Okay. Now, when you give these reminders, or you use nonverbal redirection and you use proximity to talk to a student, you're going to remind them of that, and then you are going to remove yourself from their space. Because if you stay in their space, you're only going to agitate them even more. So make sure that you give them that redirection, remind them of the expectation, then move on. Now, if a third time that you're having to address this behavior, you're going to approach them from the side and you're going to say, hey, I need to speak with you out in the hall. Okay. Now, before you say that, you're going to have told the students in the classroom what that means when you go out to the hall. And they should understand that they've been reminded a couple times to recorrect their behavior and they're not doing it. But by asking them to step out in the hallway, you're saving face with them. Okay, because what they will do is if you get into a disagreement or argument about your expectation in the classroom, it is going to ultimately escalate. There's no doubt about it. And so if you can get them out into the hallway, then you can have a private conference with them there. If they refuse to go out into the hallway, say, okay, well, we'll talk about this after class. Now, if they refuse to stay after class or they don't go out in the hallway, then that would be insubordination. Okay. And if you had an opportunity to tell them, I'm sorry, I know I needed to have a conversation with you about this and you refused, so I'm going to have to refer you to the office. Okay. But typically, after you've had that private conversation, if you get that opportunity to have the private conversation, you're going to let them know, okay, if this happens again, I may have to refer you to the office. You don't necessarily want to say that you will, but if they do repeat the behavior and you got to come over to them again and say, you know what, we talked about it and I'm letting you know I'm going to refer you to the office because we've had conversations already about this. Okay. So that process works really well because here's what's happening. You're reminding them of the expectation and then you're doing it a second time and then you're giving them an opportunity to make a choice. Either fix the behavior and you can come back to class, or you're going to have to go to the office. And at that point, I can't see many administrators that wouldn't support that. Okay. But the great thing is that many times when you send a kid out into the hallway, they will start to think through their decision and their behavior and come back. Now, this is not the same for all students, but this will significantly reduce your referrals. When I started using this process, like I said, I went from 70 referrals in a year to 9. So that was a significant decrease. And so if you just give students opportunities to fix the problem and remind them of the expectation and why you're addressing them, there is no guesswork. They know why they received a referral. What I hate to see happen is when a student is misbehaving in the classroom and all of a sudden the teacher triggers that and says, that's it, you're going to the office. That is not helpful to you and your student's relationship in the classroom. And I would highly discourage doing that. A student from a trauma environment should know they're going to receive a referral if they continue their behavior and you've let them know that ahead of time. Super important, okay? But when a student is referred to the office, make sure that when you call, you start with a positive about that student when you call, insert the behavior and the issues and ask for support from them and end with a positive, okay? Always start and end with a positive with that phone call to the parent and make sure you call before the student gets home because the student is going to have created whatever narrative about that situation to the parent, and more than likely it's going to be part true and part untrue, and it's going to be skewed to their version, and the parent will have a very difficult time of adjusting to what their child told them. But if you tell them up front and then the child goes home and tells the story, then the parent's going to try to piece that together, okay? And then you can set up a parent meeting if you need to or whatever, but it goes a long way to building a positive relationship with the parent and you getting help for dealing with that student's behavior by making sure that you're calling parents when you make referrals. Let them know what's going on in your classroom, and I guarantee you a lot of your behavior issues will decrease if you make those calls home. So I've talked about this referral process. This is a great thing to go back to in my video. Again, when a teacher makes a request, you walk away, wait 30 to 60 seconds. If the student completes the request, you give feedback and you compliment them for following through. If they don't complete the request, you restate the request, walk away. If they complete it, you give positive feedback. If they don't, you follow your discipline procedures. So just make sure that you follow this system. It works really well if you put it into practice. Addressing student misbehavior in class. So we talked about this a little bit already. Make sure you approach students from the side. You can even lean down and get on one knee like this teacher is right here. That's a great strategy, getting down on their level. But what you don't want to do is what this teacher is doing, where she's standing over the student and lecturing them. Now you're in a position, more of a power position, and students from trauma and students from those kind of environments are going to end up getting triggered. You're going to end up getting in a toe-to-toe conflict with them, and it's not going to be good, okay? So make sure that you approach a student from the side and with a caring and tone, okay? Be calm, cool, and collected when you're talking to the student, and you can just ask a simple question to them. Like, questions are great prompts. Ask them, what are you supposed to be doing right now? Or what classroom expectation are you not following? Questions are a great way for you to access their mindset and what's going on with them, what's happening in this moment. Okay, remind them of the rule, okay, if they don't know, and affirm if they know, and keep going. Okay, so those are positive interactions that you'll have, or you can go back to that 3-step process or 4-step process that I used in the previous slides. So those work really well. Now remember, you should really be at that desk for no more than 5 or 10 seconds, especially with an agitated student. Give them opportunities to fix the problem, remind them of what they need to do, and walk away. Don't stand there and wait for their compliance, because that's only going to agitate them further. So basically, you're reminding them, you're walking away, and then you're checking back in from a distance to see that they're complying. Okay, that's the best way to approach that. Okay, so restorative conferences, very important. So I talked about having this conference, and this happens either in the hallway or it happens after class, okay, depending on what went on. So the biggest thing that you can do is you really want to hear the student voice. You want to find out, well, what happened in there? What was going on? What were you thinking about when you did this or did that? Or when I saw this behavior? You need to let them know, who did this impact? It could be another student or you being able to teach, and how so. Okay. They need to understand that. And then you can ask them questions about, well, what could you have done differently? What would you do differently if you could go back and do this over? Okay. Or what is my expectation? We talked about that. If you're coming back into the classroom, what is it that I expect you to do? Maybe they need to make repair a relationship with a peer, or say that they're sorry. And you can recommend and say, I think you should. Okay. And then see what they do. But obviously, you're not going to be able to force a student to ever apologize for something. You can't force it, but I would definitely highly encourage it if it is going to have an impact on your classroom community or your ability of students to get along. Okay. So in that conversation, you're going to identify the behavior that occurred. You're going to ask the student to step into the hall. You're going to use open-ended questions to learn more about what happened. And you're going to guide and coach that conversation to a meaningful resolution for that kid. Okay. Basic steps there. If you have, I won't touch on this for too long, but there's something called responsibility-centered discipline, and it focuses on these 5 areas here. And so when we're offering support and letting students know expectations, we're breaking it down for them, and that we state how a different behavior could benefit the student, and then close out with that conversation. We have a greater opportunity of teaching kids to take ownership and responsibility for their behavior. And so this is just a good outline and process if you want to read through that, or if it's helpful to you, to use this process as you're going through, saying, okay, I want to offer the student support. I want to let them know what my expectation is. We're going to break this down, describe how that wasn't met. If this helps you in that process of those conversations, those restorative conferences, this is a great way to approach that as well. All right, last segment that we're going to talk about is classroom management strategies here. So obviously, these are never, ever, should you ever kind of things that we need to make sure that we don't have happen in the classroom. So obviously, this teacher is not having a great day. Behavior in the classroom is not very good. And I think this is always the teacher's worst nightmares. The administrator is going to come in and see the kids all over the place and out of control. Okay. But certainly she doesn't probably have everything under control as it looks. But, sometimes we engage in practices that don't help. If we're not using trauma-informed practices and using empathy and understanding behavior from that trauma lens, I think we're missing the boat, like I said, and that's not good. One of the things is taking behavior personally. Obviously, like I said, it's usually never about the teacher. It's always about something else. Unless the teacher has not developed a good relationship with that student, taking that behavior personally is misguided. Okay, going toe-to-toe or getting into arguments with students, that does no good. Okay. Being inconsistent with your discipline, ignoring misbehavior is not good, and not resetting from the previous day's behavior. If there's one thing I can share with you that's very important is that you can't hold grudges against students for their behavior. If you give them a chance each and every day and reset and say yesterday was yesterday, they're going to respect you a lot more. But if you don't, or if you do hold grudges, certainly you are going to have more negative interactions with your kids. So you don't want to feed negative attention seeking either. Um, so students who are constantly trying to get your attention by doing negative behaviors, you want to be careful of that, because sometimes ignoring certain behaviors can be more positive for you than the other. You never want to yell at your class or implement whole class punishment. Okay. My daughter is going into 8th grade, and she will tell you that the thing that she hates the most is whole class punishment. When she's behaving and doing what she's expected, and then the whole class gets punished because of the behavior of a few students, not good. Yeah, that's the first way that you'll just kill the whole culture and climate of your classroom right there. Expecting compliance through control, trying to control the classroom, or shaming or using sarcasm, obviously not good strategies. So I talked about this before a little bit, but you really want to make parents your partner. When you have a student that you are struggling with, you need to make sure that you're reaching out to this parent. Number one, it'll build trust through that positive communication. Use two-way communication tools with your parents as well. Open up your classroom to them. Maybe you use Class Dojo or some other means to share with them the positive things that are going on, or do quick check-ins. Those are great. Frame the behavior as a shared responsibility, that you want to work together with the parent and that their child needs to do these things to be successful. And then make sure that you're connecting with the goals of the parent. I would always ask parents, what are your expectations for your child at school? Or what should I know that will help me with your child? Because they're the parent. They've been dealing with them for a long time. And sometimes, they may have strategies that work with that child. And maybe because of ACEs that are not necessarily within their control, the student's behavior has gotten off track. So maybe they can help you and be someone to partner with and be in your corner. So we understand that students usually they misbehave for one of 4 reasons. And Brian Miller talks about this in his book, Power Struggles. But students usually want power or control, attention, belonging, or competence. Okay. And power control are typically the ones that you're going to see from the kids from trauma. They're wanting to control their environment because they want to, it's better for them, or they feel safer if they're in control of things. And so they're going to kick and scream for that control in the classroom. And really, for kids that have power control issues, giving them choice is the best way. Maybe it's 2 desirable choices. Either you can work on this now, or you can come after school. So you definitely want to make sure that excuse me, my laptop is running out of power here. But just make sure that you understand that those kids are going to seek power and control there. Attention seeking. Some students just want attention. They're not getting attention from the parent at home. They're seeking that in your classroom. Some might want belonging. They may want to feel a part of a community or part of a friend group or something like that. That's typically common of a lot of kids that don't have a lot of friends and peers, okay? And then competence is another. They want to appear smart, like they can do the work in the classroom and those kind of things as well. All right, so what's my level of engagement? So when we're looking at kids in the classroom, this is a great gauge from Dr. Amy Berry that talks about whether kids are in a zone of active learning or whether they are not. And certainly just by looking at this chart here, you can see that students who are distracting others or disrupting others, they're going to be disengaged. All right. So if you understand where that student is on this continuum, it will help you with their engagement level. I don't need to talk about how important relationships are. You can go back and look at this, but being positive, enthusiastic, making learning fun in the classroom, offering words of encouragement, all of these things help with building relationships. But I want to add one more thing too that I think is super important, and that is making sure that you are greeting students at your door each and every day. Do not be the teacher that's just waiting for the kids in the classroom. Get yourself outside the classroom. greet the students by name, say something positive about something they're wearing, or that you were at the game the other night, or that you were involved somehow in noticing something about them. I will guarantee you that your classroom environment will change dramatically if you begin doing this, okay? Verbal and nonverbal cues, make sure that when you are using cues in your classroom, that you're using names in your lesson. When you're calling on students, that increases that level of engagement. If you're always asking whole group, well, who can answer this question and who answers that question? The students will start to disengage. So make sure that you're using names in your lesson, popsicle sticks, whatever it is, just make sure that you're doing that. Call on students who aren't paying attention, re-engage them in your classroom, okay? Maybe you just redirect and walk away like we've talked about, or what should you be doing? We talked about that one already as well. Nonverbals, like Brian Cranston here, he's got a look, right? If you've mastered this as a teacher, you know, because students will look up at you and they will get right back to work. But the more nonverbals that you have, the better. Sometimes you may even have a particular cue. Maybe you're just going to do a desk tap and you've told the students that if I tap on your desk, you need to pay attention, okay? So you can use nonverbals as a way of re-engaging your students as long as they know what those things are. But sometimes just using look, or sometimes I'll use this one where I'm looking at the student and then I kind of close my eyes and shake my head. Those work as well for verbal redirection. I'm sharing this if you want to evaluate yourself and understand whether or not you are creating a respectful environment in your classroom. These are some great prompts to just go back, like, did you use please and thank you, or call on the other students, or greet them at the door, or that is your grading and scoring clear. So it's a good tool to use if you want to use it, just to ensure that you are creating a respectful environment as a teacher with your students, okay? Strategic noticing. This is a fantastic PBIS strategy, and I encourage all of you to use it. But to flip the cycle from bad kid to good kid, just using the statement, I noticed that you are listening, waiting patiently for me, are silent. I noticed that you're using kind and respectful tone. So you could actually add that with say, hey, Johnny, I noticed that you were following directions. Thank you for doing that. Sally, I noticed that you did a great job of balancing that equation before solving for X. Great job. Okay, so you're reinforcing by saying that I see you, I noticed you, and you are doing something positive. I want to acknowledge that. Okay, you can even say that to the whole class. I noticed that Johnny was following directions. Okay, and you can maybe even say, hey, because he was following directions, I'm going to give everybody a point, like if you have a PBIS system, so, or something in your class that you're rewarding points for. So those are all wonderful things to do to reinforce that positive piece, and to get away from that always addressing kids, a bad kid, negative stuff. Okay. Another great strategy. When students want to get argumentative in the classroom and they're debating you and they're not wanting to listen, or you just have a defiant student that's always saying, well, this homework is stupid. You say, well, that's possible, but I need you to finish the assignment so it doesn't impact your grade. I don't care, I'm still not doing it. I hear you. Don't feel the way I do. But to me, your grade is important. Okay. So it's I hear you, but to me, your grade is important. So using that strategy is that you're communicating to the student, I hear you. So many times when we get into arguments or debates with students, that's what they feel like, is that they lose that safety or control because they don't feel that they're being heard. So make sure you use the statement, I hear you, but to me, when you're getting in a toe-to-toe conflict with another student or getting into an argument, okay? Okay, next I want to talk about fogging techniques. Now, and this is called the paradoxical response. So if you've never used fogging techniques, basically this is just a way of telling a defiant student that, look, I'm not going to argue with you, okay? And we don't want to argue with students. And so we do have students sometimes that want to continue to argue and argue until we're red in the face, okay? But what we want to do in those situations is we want to use what's called a fogging technique. And basically, it's a statement that acknowledges that you're hearing what they have to say, but that you're not going to argue without telling them, I'm not arguing with you. Now, you can say, I don't argue if you wanted to, but sometimes students might respond to a different kind of response. So you might even let them know that this is your calm response, that to let them know that if I say this particular statement, that it means that I'm not going to be continuing to carry on this conversation. So you might say something like, okay, well, thank you for sharing, or I understand, or I see. Sometimes you might use, all right, or, oh, bummer. So if they continue to argue about something like, I hate this assignment, oh, that's a bummer. What are you going to do? And so it just drops it and puts it back in their lap. And you can see how I followed that up with a question at the end, right? What are you going to do? So you kind of put it back in their lap, okay? That you're saying, I'm not taking this problem on. I'm going to ask you, what do you think you're going to do? Okay. You might even say something like, That's I'm sad to see this. Okay. And then just walk away. Sometimes silence is the best thing that you can do. And sometimes you might just stand there and go, Okay. So you want to use fogging techniques when a student continues to argue and argue and argue a point into the ground. Okay. Now, where does this fogging technique really come from? If you know anything about Love and Logic uses a lot of these statements for fogging, and you can use them too. If you feel like they're effective for you, say, I know. If this assignment is stupid, I know. I don't want to do this assignment. Probably so. So you're dropping the rope, and you're basically telling the student that, okay, yeah, if that's what you think, go right ahead and think that. That's fine. So you're basically just putting them in a situation where they can't argue. Or you might even say, you may be right. You may be right. I'm not going to argue. You might be right. Maybe. So any of these kind of techniques work really well. Now, the one that a student that you could use with a student who doesn't respond to fogging techniques is you could try to say, well, I argue at 3:45 daily. You're basically giving them a reply that, you know what? Yeah, I will. You know what? If you want to argue, that's fine, but you're going to have to come on your own time because this is class time right now and it's impacting everybody else. But if you want to argue, you can come in at 3:45 daily. Now, in my career, I have used this a couple of times, and I've only had one student show up. And we had a pretty good debate and I was surprised to see that he actually came, but we had a great opportunity to build a relationship with one another because he got a chance to understand where I was coming from. I understood where he was coming from, and we didn't have any problems the rest of the time from there. So it worked out really well. Here's some Love and Logic things that you can use. Love and Logic also goes upon the premise that, we don't put specific rules about what you can't do. I will treat you with respect so that you know how to treat me. Feel free to do anything that doesn't cause a problem for anyone else. If you can't solve the problem or choose not to, I will do something. They're very broad and wide perspective kind of things, but they're great rules in the classroom if you feel like one of these rules would work for you, if you kind of like that particular thing. Over here on the right, it talks about different things like, for example, setting limits with enforceables. When we say you will, we lose control. When we say I will, we gain control. So we want to say, I listen to students who raise their hands instead of you need to raise your hands. So just changing statements, you can read through those later, but by changing how you say certain things can make a difference as well. So when we understand students who engage and have anger, we want to focus on de-escalation at all times, okay? And so, one of the things is that anger is often Darius' second emotion. It's masking some sort of fear, frustration, embarrassment, when you're seeing anger in your classroom, there's usually something more that's going on, okay? So a lot of times student escalation, the reason that happens is that their amygdala is overriding their prefrontal cortex. All the blood flow goes to the amygdala, and they literally, the term flipping their lid, right? Their decision making and ability to reason is gone, okay? So we have to stay calm. We have to use a soft voice. We have to give physical space, and we have to stay out of power struggles. We will not win a power struggle with a student who is dysregulated. It's not going to happen. You're not going to force your way into a brain that can't think, that's already flipped their lid and is in the amygdala. The resources are not there to reason. Okay, so we have to understand that. Like, do not get into a toe-to-toe and argue with a dysregulated student. You will lose every time. Okay, and we can name the feeling. We can say things like, it seems like you're frustrated. Do you want to take a break? And sometimes they'll take you up on that. And so that's great. You got the dysregulated student out. You're giving them time to process and get that blood flow from the amygdala back to the prefrontal cortex so they can make good decisions. It's probably your best strategy. Okay, taking breaks for dysregulated students is a really good thing. So if you can help your principal or your administrators understand that too, that, hey, the student was dysregulated, they need to take a break. Most administrators will support you on that, okay? Just remember, use the 90-second rule. It takes about 90 seconds for the brain to process emotion. So when you're dealing with an angry student, you need to give even more wait time than you normally would, okay? And male brains, for example, when they're stressed, sometimes it can take as much as 3 to 5 hours of processing time to get back to regulation. Now, that's only in extreme circumstances, but that can happen. So just understand that time is important. Sometimes what a student needs is to take a break or to totally reset and leave your class for the day and come back tomorrow. Sometimes they're in a state where they cannot get back to learning. It's not going to happen, okay? So just understand that response in the brain. And typically, female brains connect more with the prefrontal cortex and language centers than boys do. And they may verbalize more emotions than where boys verbalize, or they will act out of frustration or anger with more physicality, sometimes throwing things or those kind of things. So those are normal responses. And I know that we're worried about safety and those kind of things. And no, students cannot throw chairs or create an unsafe environment in the classroom. So those students do need to be removed. But just understand that it's the brain's natural response in a frustrating situation for a student. Avoiding power struggles. So remember that many times students who are in a power struggle with you, they have a feeling that they need control, okay? And that they need to have the belief that somehow that they're in control. So the more research confirms that when students are given voice in developing or modifying classroom rules, that's really helpful. But you need to also understand that sometimes giving students choices is very important, okay? Say, hey, you can stay in the classroom and work on this assignment, or I'm going to need you to go down to the office and finish it there. So you're still giving them an option that they still have to complete the assignment, but they get to choose where they're going to do it at, okay? Especially for students who are in that toe-to-toe. So power struggles in the classroom are often linked to a sense of emotional and psychological safety. Something that happened has triggered them into feeling unsafe when they are in that situation. So you need to move them to a place where they can feel safe. And it may not be in front of their peers either, because they don't want their peers seeing them angry and upset. So you may have to remove them from the environment. And maybe just temporarily, but sometimes they just need space. Okay, so we want to know, we need to know when it's time to drop the rope. Do not engage with a student who is escalated, okay? And we're either looking at verbal or nonverbal defiance, different examples here. You can't make me, you're not my mom, that's stupid, this is stupid. Or nonverbal stuff where they're smirking or flipping off the teacher, throwing things. Those are obviously other ways that they can express defiance. So you want to be careful with those students in those situations. Here's some other strategies for de-escalation. Remain calm, avoid that toe-to-toe conflict like I talked about. Don't argue with students. Ask them to step outside, save face. Allow the student time to calm down. You need to give time. Okay, time is Time is your friend. And listen and explain the expectations. Ask them if they want to return to class. If they don't, then you can tell them, well, you're going to have to finish this in the office. And sometimes just communicate with the office that you're going to send them down. So Brian Mindler, this is huge for defiant students in your classroom, okay? So keep the focus on diffusing oppositional students that questions are, statements are their fuel, questions are their kryptonite, okay? Statements are their fuel, questions are kryptonite. Do not engage with a student using statements, but instead replace that with questions. One of the questions that I've used that Brian Mindler is just phenomenal at is asking the question, who told you it's okay to talk to adults that way? Who talks to you that way? I use that in my office a lot of times when kids are being defiant towards me or disrespectful. And I guarantee you that when you use the statement, it will create absolute silence from the kid. It will stop any argument in their tracks because they are cognitively thinking through who told me it's okay to do this. And I guarantee there's very few adults who have said to them, you can talk back to a teacher or you can talk back to an adult. They are choosing to do that, but no adult told them. So they're going to have to really cognitively think through that question. I have had 0 kids since I've used that answer that question. They cannot answer it. It stops them dead in their tracks. So if you want to use that one, it works great. He also is really good at using the LAD technique, which is listen, acknowledge, agree, and defer. Okay, so you want to listen to what the student had to say. Say, I hear you. Remember, we talked about that technique. I hear you. I'm not even saying you're wrong. Remember, we talked about that as well. Not disagreeing with them, not agreeing. I'm not even saying you're wrong. We're not agreeing to the fact that this is stupid, because it's not. Okay, but right now it's not appropriate time to finish this conversation. Okay, so if that helps you, that LAD, listen, acknowledge, agree, defer, great strategy for working with defiant students who want to argue. Okay. The last one here I want to talk about is the calm signal and argument shield. So we talked about this before just a little bit, but if you had a calm signal, something, I would highly encourage you to find something that works for you. Either, oh man, oh boy, yeesh, right? Or something that indicates to the kid that their behavior has escalated to a point that they need to bring it back down a notch. Okay. Sometimes that's all it takes, because you're not necessarily addressing specifically the behavior in that moment. You're just letting them know that their behavior is out of line. So pick a signal that doesn't sound sarcastic, but is more of a signal of concern, like, oh boy, what's going on here? Okay. So just that's a great strategy. The argument shield is also really good. You can try the calm signal first, and if it doesn't work and the student continues to argue, you can say, I don't argue. Or you can use one of those fogging techniques in that position as well. And then you can also follow this up and go, and what did I say? Because what you're asking them to do is cognitively think through, what was my request? Now, if they continue to argue after that, then I would continue to go to fogging or try to move them out of the classroom so that you can have that private conversation. Okay. Okay, so last but not least, here are some of the books that I obviously have grabbed some of these strategies out of, that I have used in this presentation, that I feel would be beneficial for you to pick up. I would highly recommend a couple of these. The Classroom Behavior Manual by Scott Irvin, great. It's a little bit more of an in-depth read, but if you get a chance to go to one of his presentations or pick up this book, great strategies in there for building classroom community and working defiant students. Power Struggles by Brian Mindler, awesome. The Educating Students from Homeless and Disengaged Homelessness, Instability, and Disengagement by Ruby Payne, wonderful book. The 2 books on the lower right-hand side, those are more for teaching self-regulation, check-in, check-out, some more like tier 1, tier 2 things you can do with kids, maybe more so at a building level, but you could use them in the classroom level too. So obviously there's no one in my audience today to ask questions, but if you want to email me a question or you want to talk, I'm more than happy to help in any way that I can. You can follow me on LinkedIn or on X there. Sometimes I'm posting some things on there, classroom management wise or whatever. But again, I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you today. I hope that some of these tools can be valuable to you and that you can use them in your classroom and use them as a resource to go back to. If you're struggling with a kid and you just don't know what to do, let's talk over the phone. I'm more than happy to talk with you. Just email me and we'll set up a time to talk. I'd love to help you in any way that I can. So again, thanks for spending the time and listening to this. I know it's a long presentation, but again, I hope that this will help some of you out. So anyway, have a great school year, everybody, and good luck with your classroom management, and just keep on keeping on and getting better every day at what you do. All right, thanks everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.